going to be on managing your lands for wildlife habitat. And I was talking in the green room about how this is a perfect time of the year to be looking at your ground and figuring out what ways I can improve uh, my habitat to increase the number of critters that come out and live on it. And today we have two special guests, Jodi Provost and Troy Holcomb. So Troy, you're going to go, or Jodi's going first today, right? So
Yep.
Jodi, why don't you tell the group about yourself a little bit, and I'll just quiet up.
Okay. Well, I have worked for DNR Wildlife for 30 years in a few different capacities as an assistant wildlife manager, a resource assessment specialist, and my favorite position was as a private lands biologist. So just looking forward to sharing some of what I've learned over the years with you today.
And Troy, you want to just take a quick minute and tell us about you?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Troy Holcomb. I'm a DNR forester, and I work with private landowners in Aiken County. My job is to help landowners manage their woods well and achieve the goals they have for their property by helping them understand their woods better and connecting them to the tools and resources that they need. There's 15 or so other foresters like me that work across Minnesota to help private landowners manage their land well. And so looking forward to chatting with everyone today.
Very good. Jodi, you got your program loaded up and ready to roll?
I sure do. Let me know when you see it there.
Okay, all you got to do is hit the presentation mode and we're good to go.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I was really happy to have this opportunity to share and to get to do it with Troy. I think you're getting to get the best message here and information with the expertise of both your wildlife and your forestry folks together. So I'm going to be talking about the habitat part of it a little more heavily. As a private lands biologist, I got a lot of calls, emails, inquiries from wonderful people all over the state saying, hey, guess what? I just bought a piece of land, or I'm retiring here, or inherited a place, or I've got my favorite hunting place. What can I do to, improve my land for wildlife? And so it's always fun to share with them that you want to maximize wildlife, you need to maximize habitat. So that's what we're really going to focus on. And what is habitat? Well, we probably all learned as kids in school that it's cover, food, and water. But it also includes the space to find those resources and the time to survive and reproduce. With wildlife, it's all about energy, getting energy and conserving energy to survive and pass on your genes to the next generation. So that cover can be everything from the nest, the den, a place to hide, rest, to roost, to perch. Food is everything from the prey animals to plants, browse, mast, which is acorns and berries, to insects and pollen. Water, of course, enough of it, and clean water. And then, as I said, that space and time. And whether we realize it or not, we're all habitat and wildlife managers pretty much in some sense, whether you have a small yard or you have 100 acres or more. And habitat management, really it's managing the vegetation, and I like to call it just gardening on a larger scale, basically. You're deciding what plants you want on your land and the stage of them and the diversity of them to benefit the species, the wildlife that you're after. So it all depends upon your goal. And when we do our management of our forests, of our woodlands, the more intense it is, the more we're going to benefit those early open habitat types and wildlife that use them. And the less intense it is, the more we're going to benefit the later, older forest stages and bigger, older trees. And this continuum here is a really nice example of that. Here on the left, you've got, say, example of your wide open prairie habitats, and on the right, through succession, the older forest habitats up to conifer forests. When you manage more intensely, you're going to benefit wildlife such as sharp-tailed grouse. When you manage less intensely and you have mature forest and older trees, you'll benefit wildlife such as pileated woodpeckers. And in our habitat management, use a variety of techniques to influence the age of those plants, of that vegetation, the structure of it, the composition of it, and the patch size. And when I say patch size, I mean an area of similar type vegetation. Everything from brush mowing, this is an example from a sharp-tailed habitat project, to seeding natives, this is an old field being restored, to planting trees, to treating invasive plants such as buckthorn here, even to using grazing as a habitat management tool, to timber harvest and prescribed burning. And I have 10 top tips I like to share about maximizing habitat that I will touch on. First of all, to consider your surrounding habitat and neighborhood, to consider wildlife of special concern and interest to you, to create a long-term plan, to keep those large areas of natural habitat and their connections, to manage for native plants, to keep that forest structure and diversity, to always protect your wetlands and shorelines, and then to implement that plan and enjoy and share your land and habitats, and be sure to pass it along. So first of all, a little bit more about considering your surrounding habitat and neighborhood. Obviously, you want to consider, okay, where in Minnesota is my land? Is it in the coniferous forest, the deciduous forest, the aspen parkland, or am I out on the prairie? And that, of course, will affect what it makes most sense to manage for, what you'll be most successful at. And then to consider, in your neighborhood, that biodiversity web, everything, the plants, the wildlife, it's all interconnected, depends on each other. What might be missing in your neighborhood that you could help provide on your land? So to think about that bigger context first. And then to think about what particular wildlife are you interested in, maybe what wildlife are experiencing population declines, loss of habitat that you could really benefit. And you can learn some of these things by visiting with some of your local natural resource professionals, whether it's your DNR wildlife person or forester or other people in the profession. So after you determine what wildlife you want to benefit, think about what are their habitat needs and what can your land feasibly provide for that wildlife. And then create a plan. And Troy will touch on this more too with forest stewardship planning. But basically, after you've identified your goals of what wildlife you want to benefit, then you need to identify or inventory your land. What is there? What is maybe missing to help meet your goals? And then come up with management options. And tip number 4 then is to keep, build, and connect these areas of natural habitat. The native habitat is very important. It's what our wildlife have evolved to. And large areas are always going to benefit more critters, especially wildlife that have large home ranges and are migratory. And it's important to keep these habitats connected. This slide is an example of a neighborhood actually that exists north of Cromwell. And it shows some of the different home ranges of some of the more common species and the importance of it being a neighborhood effort and why we need to work together. For example, you may have the golden-winged warbler, which home range, and that's the area it finds its resources in, is maybe only just 6 acres. Whereas a ruffed grouse will use, sorry about that, I'm touching the wrong buttons. A ruffed grouse will use up to 35 acres. A black bear can migrate many miles in the fall when they're putting on weight and have very large home ranges. Also, sharp-tailed grouse have very large home ranges. To sustain a population, it's estimated they need up to 10,000 acres in a complex of open habitat. And of course, deer can have home ranges up to 1,300 acres, and if they migrate to a deer yard, even larger. And then our little woodcock here of just perhaps 30 acres. And then managing for native plants. Native plants are what wildlife evolved with and are dependent upon, and it can be the other way too. Plants can be very dependent certain wildlife species, to propagate them, to spread their seeds. If you go with native plants, they're going to be better adapted to your local soil, climate, environment, and that's whether it's trees or shrubs or wildflowers or wild grasses. Also, keeping your native plants will retain the biodiversity and keep that stronger ecosystem web, keep it functioning better on your land and neighborhood. And number one these days to keeping our native plants present is to prevent, early detect, and control invasive plants, such as the example of buckthorn in this picture. We need to keep these plants out because they choke out the native plants, and then you're going to lose habitat and lose wildlife. Here in this example, we've got some native berries here from high bush cranberry. So come clean, leave clean is very important when you're enjoying your land. And then the sixth tip is keep forest structure and diversity. All of the structure in your forest, from the very bottom layer, even in the soils, to those lower grasses, forbs, shrubs, the young saplings, up to the super canopy is important. So that vertical structure and horizontal structure provides food, cover, and important functions, and more different niches and habitats for an array of wildlife. Everything from those downed logs on the forest floor for rough grouse to those super canopy trees such as white pine for eagles. And then the seventh tip is to always protect your wetlands and shorelines. This adds to the diversity of the forest, of course, provides that clean water and enough water that wildlife need. Those vernal pools, even though they're small and shallow in the spring, are the first ones to warm up and provide breeding areas for amphibians like the salamander here, to provide invertebrates for waterfowl like the wood duck to feed on. And this transition zone, whether it's in a lake or a river, is very productive, and we call it a ribbon of life. You'll find a lot of wildlife here. And then number 8 is to implement your plan. Actively stay engaged with your land and management. Get out there, enjoy it, hike on it, hunt on it, bird watch on it. Observe how it changes throughout the seasons and the phenology. Really get to know it. You'll learn a lot from your land. Follow through on your plan recommendations, and of course, adapt as you need to. And stay in touch with and collaborate with your local natural resource professionals. So there's folks such as, myself and Troy, but there's also people at your local Natural Resources Conservation Service office, your local Soil and Water Conservation District, your Fish and Wildlife Service, Pheasants Forever, the American Bird Conservancies. There's quite an array of folks out there to help you. And sorry for all these acronyms. That's why I made sure I explained what they all were. But there's a lot of folks that can help you. And this website here, on our DNR website, we have a private land habitat page, has links to many of these resources and people. And number 9 then is to enjoy and share it. Feel good about your accomplishments and pass it along. I'm no expert on passing land along, but I do know the University of Minnesota Extension has some very good resources and workshops. What I've learned is that a will, a trust, or limited liability company is not necessarily enough. That to do a successful land transfer, you really need to communicate, have a family vision, know your options plan, pay attention to the detail, and have a legal structure. So I would encourage you to go to the Extension's website for more resources on that. So if there's anything you take home with you today from my part of the presentation, I'd really encourage you to remember that if you want to maximize wildlife, you want to maximize habitat, and that quality, natural habitat is key, and that every landowner can make a difference, whether it's your backyard or your back 40 acres, and that it really takes a team of us, a team of landowners, to sustain wildlife because of those large home ranges of some species, migratory species, and needing to repeat those home ranges again and again across the neighborhood to sustain populations, and to go ahead and go to this private land habitat webpage on our website for more information. And so with that, I will pass it along to Troy to follow up more from the forestry end. Thank you.
All All right. Well, Jodi stops her program there. I'll make Troy the presenter. And I just want to remind people, I had a lady just called and is having some trouble getting in, but this is recorded and will be on our website later. So you will be able to see that at a later date if you want. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section. So, and Troy, you should be good to go.
Okay, bear with me here for a second and we'll get this loaded up. How's that look, Benji?
It looks good.
Okay, yeah. So now that Jodi got her juices flowing with all those nice pictures and her famous top 10 list, I want to go through some ways that people can kind of implement some of her ideas. And so I'd like to discuss with you for the next 10 or 15 minutes some of these topics. And then I hope to leave enough time for the audience to get involved. So start thinking of your questions now, and we're looking forward to having a good discussion with everybody. Jodi mentioned having a plan. So I want to talk to you about how you can develop a property-wide management plan for your land. Touch a little bit on tax and incentive programs. Some of that maybe is down in the weeds, and we can get to that at a later time. I want to talk to you about how you can do projects on your land and how you can take advantage of cost share funding that's available to help you complete those projects. Timber sales can be a valuable and important tool if done right. We'll discuss that. I'm going to share some other sources of information if you'd like to dig into this a little on your own, ways to get involved, ways to take action, and then again, time for questions. So why would I get a woodland management plan? I get asked that quite often. One of the answers might be that you want to improve your woods, but you don't know how or where to begin, and that's maybe why you're here today. Maybe you've done some food plots, you've done a few things, you planted an apple tree, but you want to know some more ideas or learn some more in-depth ideas on how you can improve your woods. And maybe the cost of owning your woodland is high and you want to qualify for a tax incentive so you can keep it. All of these things you can get out of a stewardship plan. This is what a woodland stewardship plan book looks like, and these are some of maybe the particulars of the woodland stewardship program. Properties need to have 20 acres of non-agricultural or non-developed land to qualify. Stewardship plans last for 10 years. Your land's always changing, whether you notice it or not, and it's beneficial to revisit your plan every 10 years, reassess your goals, reassess your resources, and develop some new recommendations. Plans need to be written by a plan writer who's approved by the DNR. These are foresters who are educated, they've had training, they take continuing education, and the plans are reviewed by DNR staff against a set of standards to make sure that everybody's getting a quality product. A professional forester is going to meet with you and walk your woods with you, help you develop some management recommendations based on your goals, your objectives, and the resources you have on your land. Once your plan's complete, it would qualify you for some tax incentive programs. In Minnesota, private forestry consultants write most of the plans. And I'll talk to you a little bit more later about how you can find someone to write a plan for you. If the DNR were to write your plan, it would cost you $300 plus $7 an acre. And right now we have a $300 cost share reimbursement available. So you would pay for your plan and then we'd give you $300 back. And that applies to whether a DNR forester or consultant forester writes your plan for you. This is maybe what a map would look like if a forester wrote a stewardship plan for you. And you can see where they've identified all the unique cover types on this particular property and kind of delineated them For each of those areas, you'd get a thorough description of what the resources are like: the soil, the water, the plants, the trees, their condition, their health, and then some management recommendations for each of those unique areas to help you meet your goals for your land. If you want to learn more about this right now, I think there should be a link in the chat, or else you can just Google MN Forest Stewardship and it'll bring you right to our page and help you get started. Usually after people get a forest stewardship plan, the next thing they'll do is read through it and find one, two, several projects that really jump out at them, and then they want to start implementing them. And that's kind of where I come in. And so for project level assistance, you might be wondering why you'd seek assistance for a project. Some people have a stewardship plan. It might sit on the shelf for a while, and eventually they want to start implementing it. Some people want to do a project, but the cost might be prohibitive and they want some financial help to do it. And some people just have ideas for a project, but they don't maybe know the best way to complete it, or they need some help and kind of walk them through that project. Here's some examples. Here's a single example actually of a project with the goal of improving wildlife habitat. And so what they did here is in those tubes is planted red oak seedlings. And that's with the future goal of providing hard mast for wildlife, acorns. They've alternated the rows with white spruce to provide thermal cover for wildlife in the winter. So Jodi talked about everything costs energy with wildlife. And what they've done here is created a food source next to a source of cover so that wildlife can meet several needs without spending a lot of their energy. And the tubes there were installed to protect the red oak trees from deer browse. And then you can even see this strip here was sprayed to reduce grass competition on those seedlings to improve their growth. So 3 or 4 different practices here, different projects that were all planned with the help of DNR Forestry and subsidized through our cost share program. Here's another project with the goal of maintaining habitat quality. Jodi talked about encouraging native plants, discouraging non-native plants. And buckthorn has the potential to really lower the habitat value of your property. This gentleman here is using a PVC tube with a wick at the end to apply herbicide to a buckthorn stem with the goal of removing buckthorn from his stand of hardwoods. We've done other projects with landowners where the buckthorn infestation was really severe and we had to mow all the buckthorn down and spray it after it resprouted. So just another example. But there's tons of great project ideas. Browse protection for conifer seedlings, otherwise known as bud capping. We could do site prep for planting trees, chemical or mechanical site prep. Pruning your white pine to keep them healthy, reduce the incidence of blister rust fungus, nest boxes for wildlife habitat, stream bank stabilization for water quality. It's a pretty long, thorough list. And as I mentioned, we have a cost share program through the DNR, Minnesota DNR Forestry, that can help people complete these projects. So a woodland stewardship plan is not required. Professional forester prepares a project plan for you. There's no minimum acreage, property size. Our goal is to share about 50% of the cost of a project with the landowner. The landowner is reimbursed after the work is completed according to the project plan. So what do you need to do if you're interested in what we're talking about here? Contact the DNR forester, and on our website, the link should be in the chat. You can just go right on our website and find the DNR forester that covers the area that your land is in. Discuss with us what type of project you're thinking of doing. We'll come out, walk your land with you, mark out the project area, and then develop a plan that kind of describes what's going to be done. Everybody's on the same page. cost share application gets submitted and the funds are approved. They're just sitting there waiting for the project to be completed. After the work's completed, a DNR forester will come out and inspect the work, make sure it's done right, and then the payment is made to landowners. So a lot of people choose to do all the work themselves. Other people maybe don't have the capacity to do some of these projects themselves, and we'll do our best to help you find someone that can help you complete your project, a contractor, for instance. Here's an example of what a project plan might look like. It's got a map. It's got some specifications and project description. And again, if you're interested in cost share or project management or assistance, just Google MNDNR financial assistance, or just click the link that's in the chat. Money is available right now. It's typically only 7 to 14 day turnaround for the funding to get approved, and then you can get to work. And it's actually a pretty slick program. So apart from engaging in a project that might cost you money, harvesting timber is another option. Can be a great tool for keeping your trees healthy and creating or enhancing habitat. Jodi talked about how this habitat work can be like gardening. And I kind of, when she said that, I'm thinking of an oak stand that maybe has a lot of trees growing close together. Liken that to growing carrots in your garden where you have to weed out the carrots. You might need to do the same thing to your oak stand, weed out some of the smaller, poorly formed trees to allow the good quality trees to produce more acorns, have more growing resources, and stay healthier. As another example, we talked about having a winter food source next to cover. As part of your forest stewardship plan, maybe you identify an area of aspen that if you harvested it, it would regenerate, provide a lot of good winter browse, winter food source, and locate that harvest next to an area that deer can find cover during cold winter weather. And, so those are two good examples of how you could use a timber harvest to improve the habitat value of your land. But it's important to do it right. There's a right way and a wrong way to harvest timber. And to be honest, the best way to get started is to have a forester on your team. DNR foresters can help you with a timber sale. We do charge 13% of the sale value. We'll help you appraise the timber, paint the boundaries, send out bid announcements to loggers. Private forestry consultants can also do all of those things. Their prices maybe vary a little bit more and are a little bit more negotiable. But I guess my point here is if you're thinking of having timber harvested on your land, the best way to get started is to have a forester on your team. So some other places to look if you want to learn more about your land. My Minnesota Woods is a really neat website run by the University of Minnesota Extension. And they write a lot of articles. They have a newsletter. Minnesota Forestry Association has a call before you cut program, and it's kind of modeled after Gopher State One Call. But if you're thinking of harvesting timber on your land, this is a great way to dip your toes into it. It's strictly information with no obligation. You just call or go on their website, and they'll send you a packet of information that you can use to get started yourself or use to learn more about having timber harvested. So taking action, getting a woodland stewardship plan. There is a list of approved plan writers on the DNR website, or you can just Google MN Stewardship Plan Writer. And I think that's a great way for people to get started understanding all the resources their property has and also the properties around you and the landscape as a whole. And maybe a lot of the area around you already has a certain type of habitat. And if you can provide what's lacking on your land, you might see more of what you're looking for, more of the type of wildlife you're looking for. But working with a forester to gain that perspective, it can be very valuable. There's other ways to get involved. You could join Minnesota Forestry Association. It's a group of landowners just like you that maybe have been through what you're going through right now. There's a lot of good fellowship information, events, opportunities to get engaged with other landowners. There's also the Minnesota Women's Woodland Network, and provides the opportunity to recognize and enhance the role of women in woodland management. You could consider becoming a master woodland owner, again through University of Minnesota Extension, somewhat like a master gardener, master naturalist, but it's a series of courses that will help you understand your land better. And many of you have seen these tree farm signs. That's kind of a neat program, recognition of quality forest management, and you get a neat magazine, some education, things like that. If you'd like to go further, I love getting phone calls. I love getting emails. Feel free to call or write. As I mentioned, there's a forester like me that works in the area that your land is located. So if I'm not the right person to help you, I will definitely find the right person that can help you. So thanks for your time.
Okay, nice job, guys. Go ahead and close your presentation there, Troy. And that'll give the full screen to the viewers.
And if while Troy is doing that, I could share a little story I'd like to.
Sure.
So I think this is a really good example of what Troy and I are sharing today as far as what can happen with a piece of forest, somebody's special hunting land or recreation land. We had a family member who put their land up for sale, a very large intact piece of beautiful native forest. And to help them be able to keep it in the family, we made them aware of the possibility of getting a stewardship plan. So they did work with one of our stewardship plan writers to get a plan. And then once they had a plan, they did sign up for one of those property tax relief programs. So they lowered their taxes, making it all more feasible to keep the land in the family. And then the consulting forester that they worked with helped them understand that it was time for a timber harvest because some of the aspen was aging. So they were able to see some income from the timber harvest. And then we also helped them sign up for a golden wing warbler project with the American Bird Conservancy and Natural Resources Conservation Service. So they improved habitat for songbirds, and then also saw some income from that too. So it's kind of a really beautiful story that wraps it all together in the end. And the land is still in the family and being enjoyed for deer hunting right now and a lot of other recreational purposes.
Good story. So we were talking in the green room before the broadcast, and one of the questions I had for Troy was about food plots. And we actually have a question from Lance. It says, when creating a food plot, are there any shortcuts? And Lance, I haven't found any good shortcuts. If done like traditional farming, it would involve getting a pH sample, then killing the weeds, tilling, liming, fertilizing, all of which are considerable efforts, almost akin to row crop farming. If you don't do a lot of those steps, you're going to have a short-term plot. The weeds are going to come back and choke out your plants pretty quickly. I've done small food plots with just the old garden tiller, and I've done large plots where I rented a ASV and put a rototiller on the front and did the liming. And I had a good food plot for about 5 years. And as the pH came back up in the soil, as the fertilizer started to wear away, the crops got smaller and smaller, and now we're back to a grass type food plot out there again, which the deer don't use as much. So I think we'll probably get a lot more questions on that, but here comes another one regarding food plots. Are multiple small patch stands better than one large one? Does it matter if you're in northern Minnesota, southern Minnesota, for this answer?
What do you think, Jodi?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit on food plots. I guess kind of first of all to begin with the big picture before we get down there to their specific question is um food plots are a lot of fun. I know our family enjoys them putting them on the land too. It's a fun way to kind of feel like you're farming and to watch things grow and make a difference. However, it always is most important, as I said in my presentation, to focus on putting your energies and efforts into long-term natural habitat. That's what our wildlife evolved with and what they really need most of all, especially here in the forest, to survive and reproduce. But if you know, in that context, then if you have spots that are already disturbed, say an old hayfield, a log landing where that might be a good spot where you can put in a food plot without, you know, taking out native forest. Those can be fun spots to sort of put at the dessert because those food plots are like dessert and they're going to want to eat them up first. And they might not last through the winter like you wanted. And they might benefit just a couple species versus native habitat will benefit many species and have multiple benefits. But yes, if you find that right spot, I think I'm gonna need to be reminded of the question again. what is about the size and how many?
Right.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So several smaller ones is probably going to be better than one bigger one. It makes more edge, more diversity. Also, though, important thing to watch out though for is that come clean with your equipment, go clean with your equipment. Food plots can be a place where we accidentally introduce invasive species on our equipment or disturb the soil, and then it's a spot for them to take hold. So if you do food plots, watch very closely around them to make sure you haven't introduced any native or non-native invasive plants. And if you do, you know, quickly eradicate them.
So Jodi, this is Benji. While you're talking there, I'm going to remind everybody to put your questions in the Q&A section if you could, but we did get one in the chat. You just told that great story about the family trying to preserve their land and stuff. And Benita was wondering if you could give a couple more specifics with about how much money it cost versus how much money coming in that scenario.
Sure. All right. It cost very little relative to what was gained. For example, we used the $300 cost share that Troy talked about to help cover some of the stewardship plan costs. And then what cost for the rest of the plan was quickly recouped from the logging and the Goldwing Warbler incentive payments. So I would say very little, you know, just some of our time. And it was fun to work with the consulting forester. He was just wonderful. And the stewardship plan writer too. It got to go out and walk with them through the forest, ask some questions, learn what they're doing and why. It was a really good process the entire way through. We had a good logger. I went out and checked and visited with them. They're always happy to have the landowner stop by and, you know, and visit with them and see what's going on. And now a year later, just the browse and regeneration after the logging is just amazing and beautiful. And they did a nice job leaving the mature forest patches that we wanted. We have a lot of diversity left out there.
To that point on economics, yeah, I mean, there is some cost to get involved. It's the cost of the stewardship plan. I mean, you're basically paying $7 an acre. Most people will turn around once they get that stewardship plan done and enroll in one of the two tax programs that I mentioned. The most popular one further up north is called SFIA. It's an acronym, but for that you have a stewardship plan, and then you record a covenant on your land that says you're basically going to follow your stewardship plan, and you're going to keep your property intact. You're not going to build a bunch of structures on it, turn it into a farm, subdivide it into parcels smaller than 20 acres. For most people that own a 40, 80, 160 for hunting, recreational purposes, to go up north on the weekends, SFIA turns out to be a really great fit. The minimum commitment for that program is 8 years, and you get paid $9.71 per acre every year. So right away in the first year, you're basically making money. And then you have this great plan, you have a relationship with a forester, and you have someone you can call, bounce ideas off of. So yes, there is some cost initially to get started, but over the long term, I think it comes out much more positive.
Okay, we got a few more questions that have popped in. Any tips on generating white oak? I've just tried for years with no luck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can be a tough nut to crack, or a
Germany.
tough acorn to crack, actually. Um, yeah, there's a lot of challenges. Red oak are very important trees, both for wildlife habitat value, timber value, um, certain soil types, certain landscape areas. That's the right tree to be growing there. Um, but there's a lot of challenges. We historically had a lot more fire on our landscape that controlled some of these other tree and brush species that can compete against red oak seedlings. And we have a really high deer population. And so red oak seedlings might germinate and grow for a year, but then they get browsed by deer over the winter. And that can be really detrimental to their growth. So it takes a lot of intensive steps. You have to go about it with purpose. You have to create an environment, meaning like a light level in which a red oak seedling can survive. So you're typically manipulating the canopy of a mature forest, or you're controlling brush to give those seedlings light. And then you have to protect them from deer. And so
Yeah.
it can be done, and we have the means to help you do it, along, with our cost share program and with project planning assistance.
Yeah, and
I
then
answered that.
add on a little bit, to add on a little bit, the deer situation, you can protect your oaks. Like we've done with plant skid is a good thing to spray on in the like early October or so, to keep them from browsing on them in the winter. And then also with regard to deer, it's every landowner's responsibility, especially if they own really large tracts of land, to help manage their deer population. And our biggest tool for doing that is our deer harvest going on right now. So encourage people to be deer hunters, and if they're not, to let other family and friends on their land, to keep that deer population in check, because they're what we call a keystone species, and deer can really impact our forest and what plants are growing on them and what's regenerating.
Good point. Got just a quick comment here from Andrew. He's reminding us that planting a lot of corn for a food plot, you might attract unwanted species. You might have more bears coming to your corn stand than deer later in the year. So that's a good point to bring up, Andrew. Thank you. Next question is, could a similar plan to the forest stewardship plan be developed to reintroduce beaver into a now dry wetland complex? 2 beaver dams are still present on the land, and the small creek runs through it.
Yeah, here in Minnesota, we have a plenitude of beavers. So basically, if you've got attractive enough habitat for them, eventually they're going to find it. So if you've got running water, young deciduous forests, just given enough time, they're going to show up and start using it. Unless you've got somebody heavily trapping in your neighborhood, or but they're pretty darn persistent, good engineers.
I just got a question sent by another method, or a comment about smaller parcels. Is there enrollment programs for people with 20 acres or less?
That does get to be a bit of a challenge. I'm always willing to meet with anyone. If you own 15 acres, I will come walk with you and talk about your habitat, talk about your trees. There is that 20-acre minimum to get an official registered woodland stewardship plan. But I have written quick, 2-3 page plans with a map for people. We do that occasionally. Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question.
Good. We have
sorry, Craig, but our cost share program would work for a landowner that has smaller than 20 acres. We just kind of have that 20-acre minimum for the stewardship plan and tax programs.
Okay.
Thanks.
Got a buckthorn question. It says, I noticed in the photo that the buckthorn was being removed in the winter. Can it be cut and chemically treated on the stump in winter?
Yes, it can. The oil-based herbicides that many people use can be used down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit effectively. So right now actually is the most opportune time to identify and treat buckthorn. It's likely the only thing in your woods with green leaves on it. So even if you don't treat it right now, you could go out there with a roll of flagging and mark your buckthorn trees or shrubs and follow up later when you maybe have more time.
Okay, next question. Is mowing old growth brush under the canopy that seems to have outgrown its usefulness as a food source a good plan?
What do you think, Jodi?
Yeah, if it will regenerate well, if it has enough sunlight, it can provide new browse. If the other stuff's old and rank.
You probably open things up so you can see the wildlife moving through there a little easier too. How do I select a stewardship plan writer? Are there attributes I should consider? What questions should be asked the writer to determine their capabilities to write a plan and that works for me in my area? Oh, and matches my goals.
Yeah, great question. We've got a really good network of forestry consultants that write stewardship plans. As I mentioned, we also have a set of standards that the plans have to meet. But every person's different, and so is every plan writer. Some maybe use a little bit more technology or have a fancier looking plan. Some foresters maybe don't have access to some of that technology. All the plans are going to meet our standard. They're going to have the same elements, the same components. Usually what I tell people is ask about their availability and their price. And there's nothing wrong with asking to see a copy or a sample of a plan they wrote from someone else for someone else, and you could kind of compare and contrast. But some are busier than others. Some you might have to wait longer. Some might charge a little bit more. Does that answer the question, Kraig?
I think so.
Okay.
Question here from Paul. Are there resources available for doing a prescribed fire after a timber sale, specifically clearing out an area to expand a food plot, DNR staff, wildlife management students, etc.? Or do you have to hire professionals? Is this something I wouldn't want to handle myself?
That's a very good question. Yeah, in general, our DNR wildlife staff is not able to do prescribed burns on private land unless it's right adjacent to some of our wildlife lands that we're going to be burning, and we can easily include it and get permission to do so. So generally, yeah, if a landowner is not comfortable burning it themselves, they'll need to hire a professional, and there are some prescribed burn contractors out there, more so in southern and western Minnesota where it's more open. There's fewer in our forest and brushlands part of the state, but there are a few, and it is expensive, but there is cost share available for prescribed burns. I think through Troy's program there is some, and then also through the Farm Bill conservation programs such as EQIP, which stands for Environmental Quality Incentive Program. You can work with your local NRCS office to sign up for EQIP and get cost share for prescribed burning. And that can help cover costs of mowing and fire breaks, paying for the prescribed burn contractor.
Nicely done. One of the last questions we have here is, we have crab apples on our 40 acres that attract deer. Is there anything that you would recommend that would work well with this non-native food source? So is there any other plantings that they could do to help?
Yeah, I guess that I would leave the crab apples. So many wildlife love crab apples, and they're not really invasive or spread or anything. In addition to that, I would just say other native fruiting shrubs, other native trees, oak trees, whatever can provide that food and mast and cover that's appropriate for their land.
Yeah, Jodi talked about as some examples like high bush cranberry, chokecherry, Juneberry. Those are some really neat fruiting shrubs that can increase some of that mast. And those would be examples of what we'd call soft mast. You
Mhm.
could also diversify the food sources there by increasing hard mast, meaning acorns. So bur oak would be a great candidate.
Yep.
Might take a while, but the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. So.
I put in an apple orchard and some chestnut trees, and my wife looked at me and she said, "Those trees are never going to produce anything in our lifetime." And I said, "It's not for me; it's for the next person that acquires this land and they want a wildlife sanctuary. They've got one in their backyard." Let's see here.
You did see one other one up here, Craig. Seth, who has some property up in North Crow Wing County, was asking about he's trying to manage for wildlife, deer, bird, fox, bobcat, etc. Had aspen that was harvested and it's now 8 to 10 feet growth. The young aspens are. Is it smart to cut down the young aspens to the ground for new young growth? Or can I stop the growth and replant berry apple trees? Or what is smart to plant?
I wouldn't suggest cutting down those trees. I mean, you will get some regrowth. It might shift more to shrub growth like hazel. I'd hate to see you lose that tree cover. Like he mentions, it maybe is getting a little bit too tall above browse height, but that's also your future opportunity, you know, when those trees are mature to manage your habitat again. But in terms of adding other elements, what do you think, Jodi? What could they, I think he asked, what could they plant or what could they do?
Yeah, I guess it'd have to know what you had there first to begin with. If there's something missing, but I think of things like patches of conifer,
Mm-hmm.
thermal cover, if you'd want to, plant some of those and release around them. If you have any wildlife openings at the edges to plant and protect some native fruiting shrubs, would be some ideas.
Yeah, with that aspen region, it often becomes an issue of finding areas with enough sunlight to get other things reestablished. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't suggest mowing down or cutting down all of that aspen region.
And aspen is self-thinning anyway. I mean, it grows really thick for a number of years, and pretty soon nature says, "Nope, you don't need to be living anymore," and these other two trees take over that
Mhm.
area.
Yeah.
And the grouse habitat that young aspen provides for grouse and woodcock cover is very, very important. Um, is there any training? I think it's through the DNR for learning to do a prescribed burn.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
It took
I'm
me
not
2
aware of
years.
any workshops that we've had, but Pheasants Forever has had prescribed burning workshops, and I think some of the local farm bill biologists have perhaps helped with that more out in the western and southern parts of the state.
Okay.
I think some
Um,
counties do some trainings on that too. They're looking for volunteers to help out with prescribed burns, and sometimes my local county over here did that. They opened it up to the public, so a few people could come and learn how to do that when they have to give so many hours back to help out in these prescribed burns. So
Yeah, it's definitely something I would like us to see to do more, is to develop those for landowners. Because we definitely need to keep fire on the landscape. It's been an important habitat management tool, and getting more people comfortable with it and having the right tools and expertise would be very helpful to habitat and wildlife in the long haul.
very good.
as long as it's controlled, right, Jodi?
Amen. As long as that's what the training's for. Yep.
Rick is asking, he said, "I have a large area that's overgrown with alder. Is this good for anything but cover? And is there any browse benefit?"
Yeah, alder is good for wildlife, and particularly, first thing that comes to mind always is woodcock. Alder provides that nice moist ground that they like to forage in. And so alder areas really, especially if they're next to some old shrubby open fields or something, just perfect for doing that occasional strip mowing to provide continuing habitat for woodcock.
Okay. Um, we asked the one about the bobcat. So it says, since Jodi mentioned conifer, what recommendations do you have to address spruce budworms? Other than pine, are there less susceptible species?
Right. Yep. So spruce budworm has been a big issue. It's an insect that affects mostly balsam fir, and it's been pretty aggressive in the Arrowhead and northeastern part of Minnesota now for the last 10 years or so. So that diversity of species or planting something that it doesn't target, as I mentioned, it mostly attacks balsam fir. Does not seem to actually attack white spruce very much, although I believe it can. So planting some other conifers, jack pine, red pine, white pine. I'd even suggest white spruce to some degree. The question seemed kind of tailored to creating conifer or thermal cover
Mm-hmm.
upland sites, I believe. So any of those species, I would think would do well. Just with those pines species, you're going to run into deer browse problems. So make a plan to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Did a lot of bud capping in my early days.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a
Um,
couple of questions in the chat coming, Craig.
Okay.
From Chris, he had a couple of them here. He has a large amount of old growth forest and would like to add some diversity of young regen, but don't want to harvest large portions of my forest. What options exist for doing smaller timber harvest that might not be financially attractive to a logger? Then he also had a question about chestnut trees
Mm-hmm.
and any tips on those. So
Well, I think to address this first question, it really depends on what type of forest he's talking about. If it's a lot of mature hardwoods, I do think there are ways that he could harvest patches in his forest to increase the diversity and both the age of his trees and also probably the species. If he has some old aspen, as a forester, it's tough to make a recommendation that maybe isn't going to allow the rest of his trees to regrow. And what I mean by that is those aspen are pretty young, early successional, short-lived species. And so the way we usually manage that type of forest is through a regeneration harvest. But I'd encourage asker to reach out to a forester, and the best way to answer that question is standing in his woods. What was the second part to his question there?
He was asking what type of chestnuts I planted. In the back of one of the hunting magazines I came across, and I bought, I think it was 5, maybe 6 trees. They're not doing really great. The type of soil I have probably isn't the right mix for planting chestnuts. I'm further north, so chestnut trees usually don't like to live this far north, but I wanted to try them. They're probably 5 or 6 inches tall. I mean, really slow growing. I don't know if the deer have found them and browsed them off, but every year I go out there and look through them, and yep, there's leaves on them. I did purchase a bunch of tree tubes and put those on my apple orchard. Um, I find that young bucks really like to rub on apple, and I don't know if they like the smell it gives them or what, but I lost a few trees to that. So I haven't seen an apple blossom in my orchard, and my chestnuts, I'm probably down to 3 trees that came back. One of the wildlife managers here in the building, he'll go out and just scatter red oak acorns and letting nature, you know, go ahead and get them started just like they do in your yard when the acorns fall and you don't get them all picked up. I did that with mountain ash berries. I went and picked a whole bunch of mountain ash, and at my old house, I sprinkled some of those orange berries around, and there's probably 3 or 4 trees that just got started over there from that. And so there's ways you can broadcast seed some of those acorns. I think you don't have to go out and actually plant them, do you?
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. You kind of, if you're talking about scattering acorns, yeah, you almost kind of want to step them into the soil a little bit to get that acorn in contact with some kind of mineral soil. Leaving them lay on top of the leaf litter, that's just a good way to feed turkeys.
The last question we're going to cover here real quick is from Troy. Any time of the year to get started on a forest stewardship plan is great. And I
Right.
think
Yep.
that's going
Someone
to
asked.
end our hour. Can you guys believe it went by so quick? We had a lot of great questions and good conversation. Benji, what's coming up next week?
Good question. It's Nature RX is coming up. We have
Yeah.
Sarah Holger's going to come on and talk about getting out in nature as kind of therapeutic, and getting out and enjoying the awesome time of the year we have called winter around here. So that'll be a good one. So thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to jump back to the practice room, and I hope everybody can join us next week. So talk to you soon.